Sit over there. You're still funny. Anyway, I have a couple of really good stories to tell you today. One continuing the thing I left off with last time, another one involving a different case, but both under the general category of the importance of our searching for the subjective truth inside what is presented to us, often seemingly to be utterly false and delusional. So it's like in that same realm again. I'm praying, it's kind of complicated, the stories I have to tell, so I'm praying I can pull it together and give you a good account and entertain you and take you into the heart of my experience with these patients. These, again, are stories that are drawn from my little bank of the most difficult things I've been through. And most clinical work, as I keep telling you, is not as difficult as this. You don't get as upset, it's not as challenging, not that much as a stake. It's more just regular talk between two people trying to make sense of a life that's been problematic. But the cases that I use for the lectures are mostly things where they're just off the scale. So back to Anna, okay? The clinical involvement with her in the years 1980, 1981, but it ended in 81. Not my work with her, I still know her now, for 2012. But the killer events that I'm trying to give an account of took place in that 2-year period, 80-81. And I rank them up there in the top 3 or 4 most difficult things I've ever been through with anyone. And I've already told you a whole bunch of the stuff that happened. The confusion at the beginning where she couldn't tell the difference between herself and me. The hit me. And then this whole long saga of the so-called delusion that evil rays were coming at her from outside and penetrating her brain and solidifying her neural tissues and killing her and all of that, and coming from my eyes and all that. Last time I left off with the story of the breakthrough that took place in relation to that, around my recognizing that what she had been telling me was actually true, subjectively true, not objectively, physically, scientifically verifiable as true. Like if you set up machines and tried to detect rays coming out of George Atwood's eyes as he was sitting there, and the little needles would go like this when the radiations came out, the needles would be flat, I would probably say. But from her point of view, the rays were coming out. And those rays consisted in my perception of her as an incomprehensible schizophrenic psychiatric object, basically. And she felt taken over by my own confusion and felt objectified and reduced to something she no longer recognizes herself. She was symbolizing that in the imagery of rays coming out. It's like a dream-like. Delusions are very similar to dreams. I'm just going to say this, I don't know what it will sound like to you, but I think a delusion is a dream, actually, that a person is having, but they can't wake up from that dream. It's a nightmare, generally. Almost all delusions are terribly negative and persecutory and destructive in their content. Not all, but almost all. But they're like dreams that you can't shake loose from and wake up to the regular world that you're familiar with. And the context in which these delusions appear is generally one in which the person's feeling of his or her own existence is slipping away. It's ontological insecurity to the max in Lang's terms, okay? It's annihilation. It's when one is on the threshold or beyond the threshold of the experience of being obliterated and erased from being. That's when we tend to generate these dreamlike images that symbolize what we're going through. But we can't wake up from these dreams. And Anna was in a dream she couldn't wake up from. When I finally realized that the dream carried a truth, she was being done in by my non-comprehension of her and my own objectifying attitude toward her, of thinking of her as a schizophrenic, which I was trying not to, but I couldn't help myself to start. Just remember I told you the story of how I loved hearing how schizophrenic and crazy she was. Nobody can help those people. So I was buying into that, however reluctantly. And she was being done in by it. But when I turned it around and saw that I was destroying her and simply said so, the thing vanished without a trace, and I never heard another word about it, and it's been 30 years since last she and I spoke about this matter. It was really amazing, and it's one of the many experiences that I've had where you're wrapped up in a connection with someone, or really a persistent disconnection is what it is. There's so much misunderstanding and all. And there's great struggle and great suffering, often on both sides, therapist and patient. And you try and try and try and try, and finally something gives. A bright idea occurs to you, where the patient finally realizes what you need to hear in order to respond more properly to them. They tell you what that is, and you do it, and the sun comes out, and things become easy after that. This is an example of such a story. Sometimes, though, the sun comes out only then to go back behind a cloud in the next day, which was what it was like working with Anna in these early years. And what I want to do is move into a new set of crises that I had with her that got me even more depressed and demoralized than the stories I've told you yet. These go back to the year 1981. I'm going to try to do my time-traveling mental journey now to put myself back in the mood of what it was like to be with her in these times. I can't tell you how relieved I was that she was no longer telling me I was raping and murdering her brain. That thing vanished without a trace. All the talk about meditating, dissolving the blocks and walls, being born, all that vanished as well. But I understood also what it had been about. It was about bringing herself into a feeling of being that would be born. In other words, she would be born. I just got it. I almost didn't need to say much more than, guess what, I understand. But I had to mean it, and she had to take it in that I really did understand. And when I did, she saw that I saw she had been undergoing destruction. And the destruction, strangely, interestingly, amazingly, stopped at that moment. Human understanding is so powerful, you have no idea how powerful it is. And I don't mean intellectual, cognitive understanding, like building a little theory of what something is. It's like a moment that comes between two people where one feels seen by the other and seen in the truth of where they are. And if that truth is one of complete and utter self-destruction, then that's the truth that needs to be seen. And if it is, miraculously almost it seems, a transformation occurs. So I was very relieved that the thing was over, and I was hoping that was it. And my experience with very, very disturbed people has been that you have these crises with them early, and everything goes crazy, drives you crazy, drives them crazy, and people get worse, not better, but then eventually you break through and you move on to easy street. And the most disturbed people often turn out to be the easiest to work with of all if you can pass through those initial crises. I was hoping this was it. It wasn't. There was another one or another couple to go, and I'm going to tell you that story now and try to take you back into my mentality, my experience. By the way, there's an exceptionally cool, amazing, great question of the week on Sakai now. Some of you have read it. A lot of you haven't. It's again from Stuart Perlman, who specializes, or used to, before he burned out, on treating the most difficult trauma cases that the world can deliver up to anybody. And I call the question the screamer, because it was a woman who screamed bloody murder into his ears every single day, 7 days a week, for years, and his struggle with her. Would you guys please read that? By the way, a whole part of this course is the cool questions of the week, and they're optional in terms of your points. You don't have to do it. You can still get an A if you do good on the test, blah, da, 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 da. But the questions I put there, the essays I post and everything, are rich, incredible, wonderful, priceless documents. So you're cheating yourself if you don't at least read them. You don't have to give big answers, and screw the extra credit. Forget about that. Just get the benefit of reading what I'm telling you, reading what I've given you there. Also, Perlman is, I'm kind of his mentor, and he's my little protege guy. And so my hand is in those essays. I really wrote substantial parts of them, but I didn't want to claim authorship because I felt the work was his, and I wanted to honor the work that he had done by letting him be the sole author. But I just want to tell you that. So I'm very plugged into those essays. Would you please read them? And what's wrong with you if you don't read them? On the other hand, this last one especially is a difficult read because it takes you into the suffering of the therapist under the worst conditions. You might think therapy, psychotherapy, nice profession. You just sit there and go, People get better and better and better. Wrong. You're driven out of your mind by some of the things that happen. and you're challenged to the depth of your being. And Perlman gives us a really extreme example of that, and he's a hero and a saint. But he has burned himself out. He's decided never to take any such cases again. Only problem is, you never know who's going to be such a case, because somebody comes in, hello, I would just like a little bit of counseling, a little bit of therapy. You start in, and all of a sudden, Pandora's box opens. The person hasn't himself known it's there, so it opens up again. So there's no safe place you can go. You need to just drop out completely and hide under your bed if you want peace and quiet. That's what I recommend. Hide under your bed and get a gun to shoot anybody who's coming under there. I'm sounding whacked today, aren't I? Anyway, I am. They want to know why I am? Because I am whacked. Anyway. Anna. Hoping for the best, that we've gone onto easy street, which really literally happens. It really does. Terrible raging conflicts and crises and confusions give way, and then suddenly the path opens for the person's healing. And all you have to do is be emotionally supportive. You don't have to do anything else, but just, it's an honor and a joy to share in a thing like that. It's tremendously rewarding if you can get there. But you sometimes have to pass through the gates of hell at first. Anna began to talk about some other things. She would have a crisis, like hit me, or stop killing me, you're invading me, you're blocking me, you're invading my brain and all this. That was the next one. She always had something else she would start to talk about, and I'm going to try to convey to you what it was like then to sit with her, expectantly, hopefully, and have her launch in on a new set of themes. And I don't know how best to present them, so I'm just going to tell you some things she began to talk about that confused me deeply, and also told me that we were not home free yet. You get home free. Very severe mental illness, so-called, you can reach a crisis point and then you get home free and the healing begins, and you can see it's incontestable that it happens. Psychiatry knows little about this because the very severe mental illnesses, they biologize them, reduce them, and they can't do much with them, really, other than try to control them with meds. Anyway, among the 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 things that Anna began to talk about was this. One day, shortly after the ending of the blocks and rays and neural petrifications and you're killing me crisis, she said, George. And I said, yes, Anna, what? Something is scaring Anna. She spoke of herself in the third person. I said, I'll flow with that. Tell me what's scaring Anna. You seem not to know that you've not been really speaking to her. You seem to be unaware of the fact that she hasn't actually been here. I said, really? Tell me more about that. Tell me, what are you talking about? What are you saying to me? Who have I been speaking to? And she, her body, the female body of the young woman who was with me, then answered, Tom. You've been talking to Tom. I'm Tom. I said, well, hello, Tom. I'm so fluid and flexible. I'll do anything. I'll just flow with it and do as best I can. How's it going, Tom? Who are you? Tell me who you are. And Tom then began to tell me he was a young man that had known Anna when she was 13, 14, and 15 years old, and was actually the first young man she'd had sex with when she was still at that age, and taken LSD with a couple of times, and lots of smoking a lot of dope and all this kind of stuff, and had quite an exciting experience with this Tom, who now was speaking to me through her body. Okay? I did not know what to make of this, but I just flow with what I don't know what to make of it, hoping that something gives finally that will help me understand what I'm handling at that moment. What are you going to do? You're not Tom, you're Anna. You're not going to get anywhere with that. So tell me more, Tom. And he went on to describe he, she, who am I speaking to? A whole history that they'd had together. And I saw that it was a real history. It was an actual relationship with a young man she'd had, a boyfriend. It was her first boyfriend, actually. First sexual experience that she'd had. And first exciting, psychedelic experiences, too. Not a whole lot of them, a couple of them. Then I wondered whether the psychedelics had somehow triggered her difficulties, maybe. Who knows? Sometimes you see that LSD can be murder on certain people and open up a nightmare of psychosis that lasts and lasts and lasts. But then she left. And then for the next few sessions, they seemed to be conducted by this Tom character. And then I found that I was not talking to Tom, I was talking to somebody else named Sarah, a woman. Suddenly a woman is talking to me. Her name was Sarah. Hi Sarah, how are you? Tell me who you are. Tell me your background. What is the story of you? What do you have to do with Anna? Turned out Sarah was one of her best friends, like in the 8th grade. Like a young woman who was actually a part of her social group for a short period. And then there was another one, that maybe Mary, and then another one, maybe Roberta or something like that. There were 2 or 3 or 4 women, and then just mainly this Tom, and there might have been a Jack or something too there, another young man she had dated for a while and been attached to. And I was holding conversations with these people she had actually known in her life. It's like the souls of these people had inhabited her body and were now speaking through her, and Anna herself was hanging out in the background, whatever that means, however that could be. So I'm flowing with this, and I began to wonder, is Anna some kind of strange variation of multiple personality, like Sybil with 16 cells, and she's got all these other... This was not at all a classic so-called dissociative identity disorder, multiple personality, where you have different alters there. These were real people that Anna had known. These were actual human individuals she had been associated with and had liked and loved, actually. And they had disappeared. They had all been lost to her. But they weren't lost completely because they lived on inside of her. So it was like the pieces or the parts or the manifestations of the personalities of the people she had known now lived on inside of her and were taking over her body sometimes and holding the conversations with me. That was it. And I remember thinking to myself, listening to all this, I didn't understand why this should be, how it could be, just that it was. And what does this mean? And finally, I began to talk to Anna. Anna herself re-manifested in some positive way. I'm talking to you now, I'm Anna, yes, I'm here. And I asked her about these people, and she said, I call them the walkers. I said, the walkers? And then, of course, I asked, what do you mean, the walkers? She looked at me like I was a lunatic, since I know everything. The same theme of, I knew everything always, I'm God. She didn't look at it that way, it just was true. So it would be difficult to get an explanation out of her. But I was able to pull together, out of bits and pieces, the little things she said, the following idea. That these people she had known and been attached to, in early adolescence especially, 13, 14, 15 years old, something like that, had all been lost to her. She'd broken up with her boyfriend. The girls had gone about their lives, gone back to their homes out of the hospital, high school kind of setting that they lived in Pennsylvania together and shared. So they've disappeared, but they hadn't. They were still there. And they were kind of constancy factors. Walking, I pictured them as like they kind of had her arm with theirs, and they were walking her through her life. Called the walkers, because they walked her through her life. That was something. What this is about, why it would be necessary, why it would be happening, I had no idea. I'm going to tell you why I think it was, but it involves a lot more steps in my story. So that's one of the things right there. And, I had been through so much with Anna at this point that I just wondered, is it ever going to stop? The craziness just keeps coming and coming and coming, and things that don't make, and when I say craziness, I mean the things that don't make any sense. Crazy means you don't get it. You don't understand what's being. She kept generating, expressing things that I couldn't understand. It was very stressful because I knew I had to understand it, but maybe there's no way to understand it. Maybe she's just crazy. I'd have thoughts like that. One day she said to me the following. This is a little bit of a funny story. She said, some people say the moon is made of green cheese. I said, yeah, they say that. I've heard that before. Swiss cheese, green cheese, or something. She said, it's not. There's cheese all the way down to the core of the moon. But right at the core, there's a solid, substantial walnut, George. She said that. So I thought, oh my God. What the hell is she saying? So I'm thinking of kind of phenomenologically and all this. I'm thinking, well, the moon, with maybe Swiss cheese, got holes in it and all this. But there's like a core, substantial selfhood at the center. She's projecting onto the image of the moon, like a solidity of the core of herself. So I went home to my wife. I said, Liz, guess what Anna told me today? And I said this thing about the layers of cheese and cheese going all the way down. Finally, they come to the walnut. My wife broke out laughing. She's telling you she's a goddamn nut. That's what it is. I thought, oh shit, that's really true, isn't it? Getting absolutely nowhere with her. That story just I burst out laughing, but also burst out crying, because I don't know what to do with this woman. And no matter what I do, I seem to have a breakthrough, but then we start again. Oh my God, what's it going to be? What else was she doing? Here's another one. I call this the magical journeys of remembrance, which were mysterious to me. I didn't understand why she was doing them. I would come to see her at the hospital. She was still hospitalized. She did not come out of the hospital for a couple more years after we got through all these crises. But anyway, and I'd find her in the lotus position meditating. And I'd sit down with her. My aching old body even then couldn't go into the lotus position, but I'd sit down with her on the floor and I'd say, "How's it going, girlie?" or something like that. Try to be real friendly, not too sexist. Whatever, sounds sexist, girly, you know, but anyway, I wasn't ever that way with her. And after a period of silence, she would tell me, "Want to join me?" And I'd say, "What, do you want to join you in what?" She said, and then she'd look at me like I was crazy, like as if I didn't know what it was I was supposed to join her in. See, that was always the story there. And it took me a long time to figure out what she's talking about. But what she's talking about are basically journeys of remembering and reliving. She had developed a kind of meditation practice in which she would focus on events that took place in her life at any point in history that she could recall. And she would mentally transport herself back into the event, like her 5th birthday with a party her parents had given her, let's say. And she'd recall the event and then relive the whole thing in sense around, technicolor, like kind of hallucinate the full richness and intensity of the event itself, and just be in the 5th birthday party. And then she would come back to where we were. And she'd say, "Why don't you join me? Can you do this too, George?" "I'm sure you can." "Of course you can." The very idea that you couldn't do it, of course you could. And she'd try to get me to revisit my 5th birthday party, or my 3rd birthday party, or my 10th, the first time I rode a bicycle, or just events that are notable and worthy of being remembered. The whole idea of being to just put yourself back into this and just like, "Do it, George, come on, do it, you can do it, come on." And she'd close her eyes, "Let's do it, yes, 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 yes." And then we would supposedly, in her mind, go back on a kind of parallel journeys to our respective life history. She wasn't telling me I should go to hers, just to go to my own is fine. Hours spent sitting with her on the floor as she made journeys into her memory, reliving, re-experiencing, flashbacking to this and that event, not necessarily traumatic events, some painful events, some positive events. I'm trying to convey to you what it was like to be with her and not know what the hell was going on. Like, what is she doing this for? I had no idea why she's doing it. I see she's doing it. There must be a reason she's doing it. That's phenomenology. It's embedded in something. I didn't know what it was. So we had a long period of this business of being talked to by the walkers. Then a long period kind of interspersed back and forth between the two with this business of remembering and reliving, journeys of remembrance into times past for reasons I couldn't understand. And then finally it gave way to what became the focal point of the crisis we underwent. One fine day, this would be maybe 6-8 weeks after the resolution of the problem around the blocks and walls and the rays and all of that, she asked a simple question one day, and I remember this day as if it were yesterday. I can see her sitting in her chair with me sitting across from her. And she looks at me and her eyes get kind of wide for a moment and then close and then get wide again, and she says, "George." I say, "Yeah, what's the story?" She asks the following: "Can you know my whole life?" And I remember my interpretation of that question and my response. I thought she meant, can I know pretty much the whole story of what's happened in her life? She hadn't told it to me yet. She had told me certain things, many things, but there's a vast territory that there's no way. We're still in our 1st year of therapy. So there's a vast territory I haven't explored. And I said, "Well, yes, I can know everything that you tell me. And if you want to tell me the whole story of your life, go for it, babe. Let's do it starting right now. I can know everything that you tell me, and if you want to tell the whole story, yes." I was thinking that's what she meant. She looked at me with a little bit of a confused look, and she then repeated it. "Can you know my whole life?" "I think you can." "Would you know my whole life, George?" As if I hadn't really said anything. So I repeated what I said before. "Yes, I can know everything you want to tell me. You want to tell me the whole story down to every last little detail? Go for it. Do it. Make it happen. Let's start right now. Where do you want to start?" Her answer, can you know my whole life? I think you can, George. Don't tell me you can't. Come on, George. I want you to know my whole life. Now I'm going to make a long story short and just say over the next 2 or 3 sessions I had with her, the conversations between us condensed into just that. That was all there was. She'd come in the door finally, it was hit me, part 3, okay, or part 4, or whatever. Except this time it's the question. Can you know my whole life? Can you know my whole life? Can you know my whole life? Just repeat it. No matter what I said, she just would repeat the question. Often with great urgency. I didn't know what the hell she was talking about. She didn't mean, can I know everything she tells me? Because if I asked about that, it went nowhere. So that must be barking up the wrong tree. It meant something else, but I didn't know what it was that it meant. And it got to be very frustrating and confusing. So I found myself again in this situation of this person kind of beating on me to do something, saying it in a certain way that wasn't comprehensible and intelligible to me. If I said it was, I didn't understand what she meant, she'd freak out. What do you mean, you know? George! Of course I know what she means. Of course I do. And of course I can do this, but I'm not doing it. Let me see if I can describe it a little bit further in a little more detail, what it was like to be with her. I began to see that when she said, can you know my whole life, she wanted me to do something that would be this knowing her whole life, whatever that meant. And it would be a very important event for her if I could do it. And it was very frustrating to her that for some obscure reason I was withholding from her. I wasn't doing what she was asking when it was well within my power, she thought. I was kind of picking up a little bit what this is about. And she would sit there in the chair and we would sit across from each other. And each of our sessions became like this. She'd come in and sit down and she'd say, all right, all right, all right, all right, all right. And I'd say, all right what, Anna? Can you know my whole life? Today is the day I want you to do it. Know my whole life, okay? Like, know my whole life. Know it, okay? Do it, yes. I'm going to count backwards from 10. And when I get bound down to 1 and 0, I want you to know my whole life, okay? So, know my whole life. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. Her eyes are closed. 3, 2, 1. And her body would then kind of go into a kind of a weird kind of posture. And she'd be waiting for this thing to happen, of me knowing her whole life. And then after about 10 seconds, when nothing had happened, one eye would open. George, I hadn't done it, whatever it was she was waiting for. And then she would like crumple into almost a despair state. And then often at that point she would say, I'm not going to ever talk to you again as long as I live. Because I was withholding from her this magical, transforming, liberating, freeing experience that would be involved in knowing my whole life. It's very, very difficult to know what this is. But what are you going to do? So I'm very stressed out with hearing this. Know my whole life. It's the only thing she's saying. I want to throw her out the window, but you can't do that. So you listen to it for an hour and then give up. And with her despair, she'd leave the room. Know my whole life is the last little comment that she would make. So I'm thinking, I've got to figure out what the hell this is. I've got to figure this out. I've got to find some way to get her to explain to me more what she's talking about. And how I did this, I can't even remember now. But I was able to get her to elaborate ever so slightly on what she was expecting if I could do this. And here's what I came to. I'm not going to give you the steps that I went through to get there. This is sort of the surface of the concrete images, not the truth of what she was reaching for. What she wanted was for me, in a kind of instantaneous moment, to see and know everything that had ever happened to her in her life, to know her whole life. That meant I was to know in my consciousness, at the moment of doing this, every last little detail, every big thing and every small one. I was to know, for example, as a big thing, what it was like for her when her sister was born when she was 7 years old. And it was a huge upheaval in her life and transition in the family and a tremendous change. I was to know about other such big upheavals. When she was 4, her grandfather died. The loss was a terrible thing for all concerned. I was to know her experience upon learning of the sister's birth and the grandfather's death. I also was to know about when she was 2 or 1, let's say, if a little fragment of a feather of a pigeon or something floated in the window and brushed across her nose or something, I was to know about that. I was to know about every bowel movement. I was to know about all things great and small, trivial and profound, like every last little detail of every single thing that had ever happened to her at any level whatsoever. It was to be a kind of godlike, omniscient, grasping, grokking of the totality of a person's subjective world of experience is what it was. And so when I finally understood that that's what she's asking for, which is such a weird thing and so impossible in my reality, but in her reality it was not only possible, it was immediately accessible if I would stop denying it to her. I asked her, is that what it is? You want me to know every single thing that ever happened to you at every level, and the small and the large and all this? She says, yes, George, yes, exactly that, at conscious, subconscious, and superconscious levels. Like not only was I to know every detail, but all the levels also. You had to cover the whole thing. So then I thought, well, she's asking me to be God. And so what did I say? I came on with the big R, you know. I said, listen, I'm not God. Only God could know all the things like that person. You know what her answer to that was? Can you know my whole life? No, I think you can know my whole life, George. Of course you can. Okay, wait a minute. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Here we go again. We did 15, 20, 30 times. Like this 10, 9, 8, 7. Then she wouldn't talk to me anymore. She'd spin around and give up on me. But then I'd be given another chance each time, and the next time around. I thought, oh, shit. What's happening here? And you know, we've got a nut at the center of the moon. My wife is saying the woman's completely a nutcase, and she's a nut. Nobody could understand this woman. I'm so frustrated, it's unbelievable. But I'm thinking at the same time, my phenomenological self says everything has a meaning, and if you can find that meaning, it tells you where you'll be able to go with it. You can, so you have to keep trying. But it's a battle with despair. And by the way, I think I may have told you guys this before, but a certain saying or a kind of message I got from my great mentor figure, Austin Delorier, who taught me how to work, or the basics, kind of the ropes of working with the very, very severely disturbed. He said that, he once said in a seminar I was taking from him back in 1969, that if nothing else helps, and you're at the end of your rope with your patient, and you've gone on and on and on, remember this, he said, if you keep on trying hard enough and long enough, the patient will eventually feel sorry for you. And on the basis of that sympathy will actually get better, or give you what you need. Hang on to that, okay? I was remembering that statement because I was beginning to feel that way with Anna, because I'd been with her for more than a year now, and it had been hell all the way, with crises and then resolutions, crises, resolutions. We were in another crisis now. So I took myself aside, basically, and just said, George Atwood, you're in trouble with this patient. You don't know what the hell's going on. The thing seems really crazy to you, which just means you don't understand it, but there is an understanding to be had. What can be the reason she needs you to know her whole life? Why would a person need another person to know everything that ever happened to them? There has to be what it would be. So I was driving down Route 1 one fine day. I happened to remember that it was near Christmas in '81, because I was on the way to the Woodbridge Shopping Center to get an extra Christmas present for my wife that I'd only been married to for a year and a half at the time. I need to get some extra Christmas presents, a nice crystal or something like that. But I'm driving down Route 1 and I'm thinking about this patient, Anna. Why does she need me to know every single thing that ever happened to her? And then a bright idea came into my mind. I said, I know. I probably slowed down on Route 1. Whenever I'm thinking too hard in a highway or on a busily traveled street, I slow down and get screamed at by my wife, but I was alone that day. So I picture myself slowing down to 25 and 20 as I get this idea about Anna. And I've had 2 students killed on Route 1 over the years. Watch out, don't go on Route 1. Stay at the river of death. Watch out for that. Anyway, that's a side point, a little piece of advice for you. Or don't go slow on Route 1 anyway. What was the idea that came to me? It was this. I said to myself, what if there's something that happened to Anna in her life that is very, very important, that she needs me to know, but there's a wall there that forbids her from ever disclosing what this thing is. Maybe it's a secret of some sort, and she's under some kind of pressure, some injunction, some absolutely impenetrable, irresistible force that says she can't ever reveal what this is, then she could circumvent that wall, I said to myself. If I would just magically know everything that ever happened to her, then I would know the horrible secret, whatever it might be. I would be able to enter the forbidden zone. Then I asked myself, well, what could be in that forbidden zone? Let's say there is a secret she can't tell, so she needs me to grasp everything, so she can know I have this at least, have that too. I said, well, what would be something that a child, a young woman, would hold in her heart that could never be revealed to anyone? And I thought, well, some kind of sexual incest thing, maybe, is what it could be. It could be anything, but that's what are the classic secrets that a person has a wall of silence that they can't ever break through? That's generally what it is. And I began to think about the idea that her father might have been involved with her sexually and it hadn't come out yet. And there had been some weird stuff about ultra-closeness between her and her father that I had heard from the mother when she was 2 and 3 years old. So I began to think, maybe there's an outright history of incest between the father and the daughter. I knew the father. I'd already met him and the mother. But it's possible that there had been this history there. And maybe it's forbidden to ever speak of it because it would cause such a scandal and be such a shock and explode the family maybe, or something like that. Maybe that's why she's pushing on me to know this. So I got real excited about that. And I thought, I'm going to try this idea out on her, because if this is true, then if I bring it up with her, I should be able to see from her reaction whether I'm on the right track. So I went to see her the next day. This was on a Sunday. I went to see her Monday. I said, Anna, shut up a minute. Let me ask you some questions. I had very important questions about knowing your whole life. She said, no, can you know my whole life? That's all she was saying was that. I said, shut up. Let me ask this question. I was nice about it, though, whatever. I'm friendly. She knows I'm friendly and think well of her and positive toward her. I said, is there something that you have wanted or needed to tell me or for me to know that you haven't been able to say? I started generally like that. She just sat there silently, just staring at me with great big eyes. I'm thinking, oh, I might be onto something, this silence, I'm onto something. I said, let me be a little more specific. Is there a secret of some sort? Like a forbidden thing that you can't tell? Maybe it would hurt somebody or be tremendously upsetting to you or to family members or whatever if this story were ever told. Again, these big eyes, just looking. So I decided to just go for it. I said, listen, is there something that's happened between you and your father or any other family member? Something that he did with you, something intimate, something sexual. Has there been a sexual relationship of any kind, intimacy between you and your father? Then her eyes got bigger than I've ever seen them get before then. She goes, that's crazy! My father would never do a thing like that. What's wrong with you? Can you know my whole life? See, she flipped, but then she flipped right back to that again. I just felt like, oh my God. Some people maybe are just so nuts you can't do a damn thing with them. It doesn't matter what you do. Just give it up, George. You've bit off more than you could chew here. People have warned you about this for years, taking these difficult cases. You finally found someone you'll never understand. I was so depressed. I just couldn't even believe how upsetting it was. But then I reminded myself, you've got nothing better to do than just sit with someone you don't understand for 25 or 30 years if need be. Just do it. Just go for it and see what happens. So we went on with our meeting. And all she was doing is repeating, can you know my whole life? Can you know my whole life? Can you know my whole life? And I'm going to tell you something that is, again, this is building up to the breakthrough. And I can tell it, and I don't know if it will come across as compelling for you, but just trust me, it's my best way of giving an account of a profound experience for me. We were sitting on a bench outside the cottage she was living in at Marlborough Psychiatric Hospital at the time. I had come down there. I was going down 3 times a week. And it was late afternoon, about 5 o'clock. The sun was going down behind us. It was a beautiful day, 70 degrees. How could that have been? But it was a warm day, even though it was in the time of winter because Christmas was coming. So I can't explain that, but it was a warm enough day. Maybe I had a coat on. Anyway, can you know my whole life? I think you can know my whole life. I'd like you to do it now, George. Please, just my whole life would be the thing that I would want you to do. And I'm going to count from 10, 9, 8, 7. Like, know my whole life. I know you can do it. You can do it. Why would you stop from knowing my whole life? So, my whole life, please. Thank you, George. Okay, now. So anyway, I'm listening. This chattering, going on. And for reasons I can't explain, my mind, my attention shifted in the moment in the way I was listening to her, and I only heard one word being said to me by her, and that word was the word whole, and W-H-O-L-E. It was as if my mind defocused everything else she was saying. Can you know my, all that. All I heard was whole, 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 whole. And I sat there just letting that happen. And I heard about like 30 or 40 or 50 repetitions of the word whole. And the thought came into my mind, maybe this is about wholeness. She wants to be whole. And then something else, I remembered something else. She had recently told me something and been able to, very unusual way, explain it to me a bit. One day she had come in and interrupted this whole life business with a story. She came in one day and said, George, did you know I'm 13 different people? I said, are you really 13 different people? Tell me about that. And she was able to, for the first time almost ever, to explain something instead of assuming I knew what it was. She said, well, there's the person I was from 0 to 4 when my grandfather died. I said, okay. 4 to 7 when my sister was born. 7 to 8 when my family moved for the first time. 8 to 9 when my family moved again. 9 to 10 when they moved again. Family, military family, with reassignments, transferred from base to base. So she had a whole sequence of discontinuities and moves. And she had gone on to talk about, literally, I counted them, 13 intervals of time building up to when she would be 20 years old at the time of this conversation, bounded on each side, each interval, by a loss or a discontinuity, a death, the birth of the sister, the loss of a boyfriend, a physical move from the family. And she said, I'm not one person. I'm each one of these, the one that lived in this interval and that one and that one. And I realized she was describing, a little bit hard to put into words, but she's describing a feeling of fragmentation along the axis of time. Like, think about yourself, and I think about myself. Like, the George that I am is the same George that was yesterday and 10 years ago and 25 years ago and 50 years ago. My life has changes and traumas and difficulties and transitions and developments in it, and yours does too. But most of us have a feeling of a kind of continuous identity looking back in time. It's still the same George or the same you that goes back and back and back through all the changes. There's a kind of constancy over history, a kind of continuity over the axis of time. But she was saying, no, it's as if some force had come and taken a pair of scissors and cut the timeline of her life into individual pieces. So she wasn't just one person. Then I thought about these journeys of remembrance that she had been doing. I told you before about how she'd sit there and smile on her face and meditate her way back into flashbacks, into full-blown technicolor relivings of this moment and that moment, distributed all through her life along the way. And I wondered if maybe this has got something to do with that too, like she's trying to pull together or make new contact back to whole worlds of experience from which she's cut off by virtue of the fragmentation on the axis of time. And then I thought about the walkers. Well, the walkers are like repair people. They've been lost, but they're back, and they're with her, and they're taking her through her life. They're like continuity providing companions that take her through the journey of her days and months and years. They're continuous factors that are kind of countervailing, counteracting forces to help her overcome this feeling of being in pieces. And she'd given me a whole bunch of art too that showed just a whole bunch of pieces that were scrambled around, like faces with eyes and ears all in weird places and locations with each other. So I realized that she'd been giving me a whole bunch of stuff that showed a fragmentation problem, a feeling of being in pieces. So then it occurred to me, maybe what she wants me to know her whole life, the whole idea is the wholeness, for me to see the wholeness of the thing, so it'll be one unit, one containing, embracing structure that she can then look into my eyes and perceive that wholeness and overcome this terrible feeling of being in fragments, being 13 people or more, or whatever it is. So I decided to just ask her that. I said, Anna, I just had a thought. What's that? I said, is the reason you want me to know your whole life by any chance because then if I could do it, know everything, you know? you could look at me and know that I was knowing it, and you'd become whole within yourself? I just put it just like that. Here was her answer. There might be something to that. Might be something to that. That was 1981. It is now 2012. Guess how many times she's asked me to know her whole life since then? 0. The thing just went away. Just what was needed? What happened there? What happened there was she finally got it through my thick skull that she was struggling with a feeling of being in pieces, being in fragments, not being whole at all. There's an agony that accompanies that. There was a kind of a magical solution to the problem that she was reaching for, that if I could just sort of supernaturally know the whole thing, then in my consciousness she'd come together and she could look in my eyes and maybe she could then become whole herself. You could say all that. But what she seemed to need more than anything was just the understanding that the fragmentation was an issue that was just eating her up, eating her alive, and killing her. And once that was understood, this is another thing, the miracle of human understanding, everything changed. And at the end of that episode of Know My Whole Life, which I've never heard another thing about, she and I went on easy street. I never had another problem with her at all. No more impasses. We got along famously. There's great love between us. She stayed in the hospital for another couple of years. She was released in maybe 83, 84, and lived with her parents, and has been fine ever since. And I still see her. At this point, once a month or something, I'll maybe go take her out for a grilled cheese sandwich and a cup of soup or something like that once in a while. There's no therapy going on. There are no more impasses. It's just amazing what you live through these crises, and something gets squared away out of the interaction between the patient and the therapist, and then the problems pretty much vanish. So if I try to tell you the further adventures of Anna and her life over the next 30 years, which is what we have 30 more years then, the story is very boring. She got out of a hospital, isn't that great? Her medications got reduced. She's still on antipsychotic meds, but at a very low level, but she does better if she has them a little bit, a little Clozaril or something, which I have no problem with. I'm pro-meds all the way, although I'm anti-meds being the only answer. I'm anti that to the max. I think psychotherapy is the main thing with these patients, and meds are an important adjunct. Sometimes you can do without them altogether. If you can, that'd be great, but I'm not opposed to them. But what has her life been like? She lives with her parents, gets along with them quite well, watches a lot of TV, has very occasional dates, almost nothing at all in that way, goes to see a movie with a friend. She's one of the nicest people I've ever met in my life. She takes care of dogs and cats. She's not senator from New Jersey or something like that, like you might want to see some fancy public achievement or something like that. But she's a very, very constructive, very wonderful person who's done really well, and I hope she lives a very long time, and I hope she will continue to be my friend for the rest of our lives. By the way, I'd be afraid to break away from her completely. Like you could say, well, the therapy's over, isn't it? Well, the battle with the impasses and all that is over, but possibly a therapeutic bond like this one is never over completely, because her connection to me might be, her continuing connection to me might be a sustaining factor that allows her to function pretty well and continue to be more whole and not feel invaded and all of these things. And I had an experience a number of years ago with another, it's a long story short, I don't know how to tell it real quickly, but I had a colleague who worked with a patient not unlike Anna, who had done beautiful work with her for about 5 or 6 years, and the patient had recovered and was not psychotic at all. Using that word psychotic, it's a medical word, but I have a problem with it. But anyway, no symptoms, no extravagant difficulties at all, and had stopped seeing the therapist, but still had the therapist's phone number, and the therapist was still available to her, this young woman. And then my friend, my colleague, was killed in a car accident. The therapist of the patient who had done so well with him, and the patient found out about the death. And within 2 weeks, she was back in the hospital, totally acute, floridly psychotic again. So that the death had broken the